Hey everyone. So today we have a very special guest. We have my good friend Ray. Ray is not just a serial entrepreneur. He's had the chance to work for some of the biggest companies, biggest tech companies. He's worked for Microsoft, Yahoo, DoubleClick, and many more. He's also his own founder. He started his own company and has raised money from Sequoia, and eventually that company he did sell. Now, today, Ray is the managing director of and the founder of TechStars India. And I am very excited to have him here with us to share his journey and the lessons he learned along the way that we can implement in our own lives. So, Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure. So, Ray, let's start all the way from the beginning. Before this whole glorified entrepreneurship lifestyle that you currently have, traveling across the globe, having the opportunity to open up TechStars India, which is a great blessing. Let's start from the beginning, a small little Ray. Where are you from and what was your upbringing like?
Sure. So small little Ray hails from Toronto, Canada. Child of two immigrant parents who met in Toronto. They happen to have left Guyana, which is a country in South America, basically close to Venezuela and Brazil. And very poor country. And, I do have Indian ancestry before that, but they came to Canada, for a better life and, very much took pretty big risk to come there and ended up meeting there. And thanks to, open immigration policy in Canada at that time, a lot of people like them came. And so, when I was growing up, I happened to grow up with a lot of other immigrants, other children of immigrants, and immigrants themselves. And, it was an exciting, I had a great childhood growing up and grew up in a very heterogeneous environment where, there were literally kids of all cultures in school and, developed a little understanding of just so much of the world through my own little microcosm growing up in Toronto. So that's where it all started.
Wow. So it sounds like absolutely incredible. So how does a guy that grew up like that, had an incredible lifestyle, all the comforts and a great set of friends, want to do something risky and jump into entrepreneurship? Now, where's that passion come from?
I guess to some degree, as I start with the kind of fact that I'm a child of immigrants, because I think so many immigrants take risks, and ultimately that's that's probably a part of all of us entrepreneurs, is that risk taker gene. So it started with that. I always grew up building, and I had Legos growing up, and but even before I had Legos, I tried to use paper and paper towel rolls and whatever I could get my hands on, I would build with. And I was just, I always kind of grew up wanting to create things. And, I guess I had a real penchant for that. And I happened to, start my career, with the internet. And, I grew up in a generation where it was, it was really hard to go out and access, information. Mm-hmm. We had libraries. I actually worked at a library when I was in high school, and I worked in the science and technology floor of this massive library for 4 years. And I was probably the worst employee, because you'd always find me in a corner. Like I just geeked out on anything that had, to do with space or cars or, pretty much any kind of science that I could find, I would end up just consuming. And so I love that, and it was really it was really amazing to me because prior to that, like, you know, it was really hard to find, you know, to really get lost in the rabbit hole of information. And so when I started school, I was introduced to, when I started university, you know, the end of my university career started with a course where I learned about the internet. And this is in the early 90s. And what was most striking about the internet, and this is kind of pre-Netscape, pre-Mosaic, and obviously way pre-Internet Explorer, was that you could really get lost in a rabbit hole of information. And it was like this open, like through your computer, you could literally find so much information and content. And that was like at a time when there was not really that many users on the internet, and there wasn't a ton of content. And you know, the most powerful content obviously was connecting to people. So, you know, this is like 1994 or so, and we're starting to see a lot of just if you're in university at that time and you happen to go to your lab in university, you can literally sit at a computer and just get lost on the internet. And I did that. And then I that wasn't enough. I wanted to kind of, you know, I had this kind of dream that, man, like this is going to happen. Like this is going to change people's lives, and it's going to leave the computer lab and it's going to one day go home. And I tried to speed that up by setting up the internet in 1994 on my home computer. And I actually did it. And at that time, this is pre-Windows 95, and you know, and it's pretty hard to get the computer to connect to the internet. You have to connect an external modem sometimes, and you have to get the modem to talk to another modem, and then you have to launch a program called Trumpet Windsock, for those of you old enough to remember that. And then you'd launch an email client, because there wasn't anything like a graphical client at that time, or you'd launch Links, which was a text browser. And, you know, I did all that. And then, you know, so I called up, so university went on strike and I needed a job. I called up the local ISP. You know, there's only one ISP in Toronto at that time. Mm-hmm. And I said, like, hey, there's going to be lots of people coming online who are not technical. And I wasn't technical. Like, I was literally studying to be a corporate lawyer / economist at that time. And guess what? He hired me as a tech support person for the ISP. And I single-handedly kept the internet back by a year and a half as I pursued my career as a tech support person, because I was so bad at it. You know, but what I did develop was a strong understanding of kind of the kind of foundation of the internet and how it worked, and an excitement for different kinds of business models and content models on the internet. And that led me to DoubleClick, where I really, you know, at a young age was kind of going out and educating people at large companies about the internet and what they could do with it. But to answer your question, it just sparked that builder gene in me, you know, that risk taker gene that, you know, literally one's imagination could go wild at what the internet could do. And, you know, so at some point, you know, the reason I kind of, what made me an entrepreneur and where it all came together was just, you know, I got to be a part of a really important time in the, you know, really our civilization, where the internet all of a sudden, you know, became, you know, a mass consumer kind of, you know, information portal or information network. And I got to see this as it really unfolded for the first billion people, being a part of those companies you mentioned, you know, DoubleClick and then Microsoft and then Yahoo. But, you know, in 2007, when I left Yahoo, the internet still was only a billion people. And one of the things that really excited me about the internet in the beginning, when I learned about it, was its ability to democratize information and kind of, with information, democratize wealth. And so, you know, I set out to be an entrepreneur because I just have big ideas and I wanted to make big things happen. And the thing I wanted to make happen was bring the next billion people online. And yeah, anyway, that's kind of a long story.
That's absolutely an incredible story. to hear all that. So first of all, I want to say, your parents must have had a very fun time cleaning up all your messes and Legos and, paper towel, things you were making and who knows what. Um,
I have Indian ancestry, I mentioned. So no Indian parent is going to let their kid make a mess. Something I have problems with now as a parent. So, yeah.
So did you ever graduate from college in the end?
I did not. I'm a college dropout, and it took me a while to actually say this with pride. But I dropped out of college, and after I got my job in the internet, there was so much going on there that I went back and I tried to do night school for a little while, and I was just it was just such a crazy time, and I was learning so much, and I really was not learning in school. And I made again, imagine having even parents of Indian ancestry and trying to tell them that you're dropping out of school. I don't think that still sits well with my parents, but I think there's a craziness inside most entrepreneurs. I think they do things their own way. I think they have trouble conforming to what people tell them to do. And I live up to all of those things.
So you're exactly what the doctor prescribed,
I don't know about that. I don't know if my parents agree with that, but yeah.
So, you had these comfortable jobs. You had this secure environment. You have this place that, things are going well. You're working for a great company, making a great paycheck. I'm sure you have great friends, great clients. And, then you decide, what? This whole life of comfort and conformity and just conforming is not enough for me. That urge of you, that entrepreneur within you, just burning and igniting and constantly saying, hey, Ray, you got to do something more. You're better than this. You got to, that urge to build is there. And then you decide to quit your job. And you say, I'm going to launch a company. But before you go into launch, a whole phase of launching that company, you went through some type of, dark period right before when you quit your job and you went to launch that company. Talk to us about that dark period and, how you overcame that part and how you used that part to even launch your entrepreneurship journey as a what's it called again? As a booster to go ahead and build it.
Yeah, no, I reached this point, I'd spent a decade in these large kind of corporate tech companies. They had at least were large at the time that I left Yahoo. Look, I think I kind of really latched onto those companies to form my identity. And, I remember there was this deal that went south I was working on at Yahoo. And I put a lot of myself into that deal, and I took it pretty personally when it didn't happen. And, I basically just kind of realized how little control I had within that large organization. And, I guess it happened at a time when there was a lot of other things going on in my life. I was in a bad relationship and, and of course, not because of necessarily just the other person, but just kind of me and where I was in life. And I was just not, I like to think of, I think when you get older and you kind of think back, what is life? It's really a collection of stories.
Yes.
And, at that time, I had just kind of turned 30 and I was kind of looking back on my life and not feeling like I had many stories to tell, about what I had done. And I felt like I just needed to take more risk. And so, a lot of things happened at the same time. And yeah, I quit Yahoo and I took a year and, I actually I literally just kind of disconnected from everything and everyone. And I became a DJ. I was actually a DJ in high school, and so I returned back to that in 2007, and I basically did everything that I hadn't done for the last decade. And I ended a relationship. It was a complete kind of reset in my life. And then I had an opportunity to figure out after that, what next? Like, what do I want to be? If it was about stories, what kind of stories do I want to tell? And, I'd always kind of wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I had never quite committed to it. And I decided at that time that I would commit to that path. I would commit to being an entrepreneur. And I got to admit, at that time, I thought I could do anything. I mean, I was a VP at Yahoo, and I thought, hey, why can't I go out and start a company and raise money if that's what I need to do, and really kind of have a massive impact. And so, I decided to do that. But I think the catalyst for me deciding to build something was a combination of feeling like, sitting at Yahoo and before that Microsoft, and feeling like, man, we're building for literally just 1 billion people in the world, and there's a lot more that we should be kind of building for. And then secondly, kind of just feeling a personal impetus to do something challenging and to kind of make things less comfortable for myself. And so, I got to say, I made things a lot less comfortable for myself.
Yeah, I was about to say, there's plenty of other better things you could do than entrepreneurship to make yourself life less comfortable.
That's the thing to do if you want to be comfortable, not the thing to do.
So not only did you make his life uncomfortable, you decided to do the totally opposite thing, craziest thing. You're like, you know what? My life's just way too uncomfortable right now. I just got to pick up and move to India. That's what I got to do. I got to go to the fullest extreme and go crazy.
It didn't quite happen that way. So what happened was I was writing a report for I had to pay the bills. Ended up giving up most of what I had to my ex when I split up, and so I was really starting from scratch. Like, I'm bootstrapping it. The only thing I kept, I had a BMW at the time, which would eventually become the most ill-treated BMW ever. Eventually I had to pick that up. But other than that, I really didn't keep much, and I had to pay the bills. And one of the ways I did that was I was the principal author of a report for the Ontario government. Ontario is the province that Toronto is in, about how to turn Toronto and Ontario into a center of excellence for mobile innovation. And one of the things I kind of really tapped into was the fact that we had this huge kind of multicultural population, largely children of immigrants or immigrants who were highly skilled at tech because of universities like University of Toronto and University of Waterloo. And we should be kind of building for emerging markets because that's where a lot of growth opportunity was, particularly mobile. And so, I kind of wrote that report, and through that report got to kind of learn a lot about what was happening in the world. And just really kind of came out of that thinking, man, I should be building for that opportunity. and so out of that kind of came, the genesis for the company that I would build called Jixi. And kind of the thesis that drove it was that the next 1 billion people were going to come online, for very different reasons than the first 1 billion, and very different devices and very different circumstances. And so my thesis is they would come on for video, personal video, which would need to be accessible on feature phones and over 2G networks. And so we started to build on that. And that kind of really took off, and we really started devoting effort to it in 2008. We incorporated the business, I think, in 2009. I ended up acqui-hiring a company in 2009 and landing a customer largely through kind of LinkedIn conversations in India, and managed to, one of the things I mentioned that I thought I was coming into this with, I was a VP and I thought I would be able to very easily raise money and all that. Well, guess what? I timed this A, during 2008, 2009 financial crisis. B, it was hard to build a company focused on emerging markets out of Canada, out of Toronto. And I struggled, and I had a pretty kick-ass team. And it was just like really humbling. And one of the things you realize when you leave big companies is the whole reason people picked up your calls before was because of the companies, not because of you. And so recognizing that, it's hard to get people to pick up the phone when you don't have a big company behind you. That was a big revelation and a very humbling one. But anyway, I struggled. We managed to get our first check, but that check came with a condition that I move to India. And I was at a point where I really had nothing keeping me in Toronto. And I was willing to do anything I could to keep the company, to get the company off the ground. And so yeah, as the story goes, I find myself with 2 bags on my way to India in June of 2010. And I had about 3 months of runway, and I had to figure everything out. But yeah, that's how it started.
And we're not even going to mention what happened when you got to India. You ended up in the hospital for a few days, which totally derailed the whole entire fundraising process,
Lots of stuff happened. It was literally, the beginning of one of the craziest journeys. I told you earlier, I wanted stories. Well, stories.
Too many of them. Wow. And that's absolutely incredible. You're the first generation and 3 generations back in India. Right. Your grandparents left in 1917, around that time, and they traveled to South America and then to everywhere else, eventually ending up in Canada. Your parents coming there. I'm assuming that the happiness that your grandparents have, or somebody have from you coming back to your original roots, is just absolutely incredible. And I'm sure you see that the whole journey is coming back to the beginning again.
Yeah, no, so I wrote a blog post about this, but it's actually been about 150 years. So my great grandparents would have left India in the late 1800s and went to Guyana and left India with pretty bad circumstances, I would imagine, because they didn't know where they would go or if they would get there, but they did. They got to Guyana. They stayed there for a couple of generations, and then stuff was pretty tough in Guyana, probably tougher than what they were dealing with in India. So my parents left, but yeah, it was India was this strange kind of homecoming for me. I was very curious. I didn't know anyone or didn't have any relatives that I could identify here. But I grew up with Bollywood. I grew up, with a lot of Indian friends. I learned swear words before I ever got here. So I had some nuance of it, but it was really interesting getting here because, it's very different than living in the West, particularly in Toronto. I mentioned it was very heterogeneous there. Here it's completely homogenous. So it was really weird to be here as a brown person surrounded by other brown people. But yeah, it's also weird to be here, in a country where there's so many different classes. And I know my ancestors who were here, were definitely not amongst the wealthiest classes. And I look at people, who I deal with every day, and I always often wonder, like, hey, what's different between, and you could be related to me, and I don't even know. And so there is that complexity of being here, but it is kind of a homecoming of sorts.
I mean, if we had to ask a taxi driver if you're Indian or not, what would they say?
One of my first friends in India is a taxi driver. Literally, my closest friend that I made, upon arriving here, was the cab driver outside of the hotel I could only afford to stay in for a week in Lower Parel in Mumbai, and his name is Dipin, and he was like, he would not only drive me, but he was my closest confidant. He was but he was pretty clear I was not Indian.
So, you have all this whole entire journey, this whole process, this whole adversity came over. Everything else, this whole struggle. And you went through the startup itself went through many different trials and obstacles over the years, and there's many times that you wanted to give up, and things were happening. I mean, thank God, from my understanding, it's a happy ending. Eventually got acquired and moved on. But what were some of those struggles? The times when you thought, forget about it, all hell is going to break. I know we're over, we're done with. And the lessons you learned that you implemented, and how you overcame that, to continue plowing away and hustling away and building it up and everything.
Well, there's so many struggles. Like I think building a company is a constant struggle. I can, I think if there's ever those moments when you're like, oh wow, we're finally kind of in the clear, I think they last like maybe a week. So you really got to enjoy them when they happen, because I can probably count on my hands the number of weeks that was the case, and they were all separated by months of intense struggle. It was really, look, I think building a company, as a CEO, you got it. I think it really, you struggle with a lot of your character flaws, in the actual kind of, in the journey of building that company. It forces you to really look at everything that is a personal weakness, as you build that company. And likewise, I think Jigsaw forced me to do that. So it was very much a growth process for me. It was a lot about personal growth. And, definitely, like, I made so many mistakes along the way. So, it's always like, it's always easier to look at it in hindsight and think about it and talk about how real the struggle was. But, there was a lot that I could have done to have lessened that struggle. So I think a lot of that it was a lesson for me, and is what I try to bring to startups now. But I would you like me to go into some of them?
Let's go into something that you wish you knew in hindsight, that an entrepreneur could implement it today into his startup. A mistake that you made.
So look, I talk about this a lot with my companies. One needs to have an empathy for your customer. Mm-hmm. I kind of, from sitting in Toronto, thought that I could understand the needs of the new user of the internet, who's sitting there in a developing country, who's using a feature phone, and boy was I wrong. And I really didn't know that as clearly as when I landed in India. And so the first lesson is, so basically every minute I spent sitting there in Toronto building this business was wasted, because I should have been in India. I should have been with my customer. I should have been understanding the market. So the quicker you can do that, the better, right? But develop an empathy for your customer. And look, I think that, there's no kind of shortcut to what you can do to develop an empathy for your customer. The closer, if you're building a consumer business and you've grown up as the person that has the pain, I don't think you can get better than that. I did not. And so for me, it meant, discarding my smartphone and using a Nokia feature phone. It meant, needing to take the train and to familiarize myself with what people do who would be, who would have an interest in using my product. It meant really kind of getting into the trenches and talking to people. And it really, when things started, like, the things that really helped were, guess what? I hired a team of people who, came from places. They had way more empathy for my customer than I ever did. And I deliberately hired people who had that. And then every day I sat and had lunch with that team. And, look, I speak English. I don't, my Hindi is terrible other than in rickshaws where I managed to get by. But they put up with that, and they were kind of really united by the vision. And I really tried to soak as much up as I could from that team, from the people we bring in, from the people I interacted with, like my cool cab driver Dipin and others. I just tried to really work hard to develop that empathy. And ultimately, I think that's what allowed us to actually raise the money and to kind of do something and have an impact in India.
Wow. So you really put yourself into your customer's shoes. You walked the life that they lived.
Yeah, someone once told me, this whole thing about empathy, we talk a lot about needing to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but we forget to take off our own shoes before we put on the other shoes. And, when I heard that, it really kind of struck a chord with me, because you really do have to kind of take off your shoes. You have to kind of be willing to look at the world through that other person's eyes. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to do, but yeah, I really tried very hard to do that.
Wow. This empathy that you talk about, and, it's such an important thing. And I love that analogy you just brought. We forget to take off our own shoes first. I love that. That's absolutely great. And it's true. As human beings, could be very rational, very subjective, and it's very hard for us to, come across and make the proper judgments or see things from the other. Or sometimes, if we're not open-minded, we can't see someone else's point of view, really. That's incredible. Wow. So, of all this, you decided that you have to do the next phase of your career, the next thing. And everything you learned, and we'll get into that in a second also, all the lessons you've learned, you want to shout it from the rooftop. You want to impart it to everyone. So you make another journey to India, and you have the opportunity to launch TechStars India.
Yeah, it's when I was building my company, I recognized there was a lot I needed to learn. And I ended up raising money, as you mentioned, from the Indian Angel Network and from Sequoia. What I really wanted was to be around people who could guide me. I wanted mentors. And, to be honest with you, there were a lot of great people who were involved, but they weren't really there. They didn't have a lot of time to really kind of mentor in that respect. And I made a ton of mistakes, as I mentioned, in building the company. I really kind of, as this whole thing called an accelerator really started to take hold in the West, which was the idea behind an accelerator was, the acceleration occurs in that you're just around, you can kind of sound off of people, right. Talk to people, get out of your own head, and have lots and lots of conversations about what you do, and have some structure on how to do it. And essentially you can instead of limbering along for years, you can essentially boil that down to weeks or months. That wasn't around when I was building my company. Mm-hmm. And I went back to Canada after we sold the company, and I was toying with a new business as I got married and had babies, two little startups, I call them, who are now 2 and 3. But yeah, it was kind of, at that point I was kind of for the first time deciding to spend some time with other companies and take my head, off the desk where I was always focused on my own company. And so I started taking meetings and anyway, some of the companies I was working with happened to have gone through TechStars. And I didn't know about TechStars at the time, and they were coming into Toronto, and I had this long conversation with a bunch of people at TechStars about that. And I think the most amazing thing was that there's this thing that exists, and what they do is they have a very clear definition of what mentoring is, and they built a mentorship-based accelerator. And I never, I didn't understand that this thing existed until, and I was so kind of moved by the companies that I was mentoring. I didn't even know it was mentoring, by the way. All I did was show up, took a meeting, and listened to these guys. The first one was with a 3D printing company, and I took the meeting, literally letting them know, I know nothing about 3D printing, so I don't want to waste your time. But, I guess what I realized was listening and, asking smart questions and being Socratic, without kind of having any type of agenda, could actually be a good thing, right, and could bring value to a company. And so I heard this, and this is what was kind of what drove the whole TechStars discussion. And anyway, yeah, it just so happens as our kids got older, my wife and I came to India last year, and we were here for a friend's wedding, and I was hearing from entrepreneurs. I got the opportunity to reconnect and heard that, there was still this need for mentorship, better mentorship in India. And though there were lots of accelerators, they weren't all kind of really focused on the kind of mentorship that TechStars provides. And so I actually kind of on my way back to Toronto, I was having this conversation about taking a job in Toronto for TechStars. And I said to them, I'm like, it was like, I would love to do this in India if that opportunity ever comes up. Just so happened that day, they announced a search for an MD. And be careful what you wish for, because here I am now running TechStars' first accelerator in India.
Wow, that's amazing. India, it's incredible to see what's going on. India, which is a very risk-adverse country, very focused on education, and they use education is used as the gateway out, as a gateway to everything else. To see the incredible transformation that's happening now, and the innovation is coming out through technology, and the startups are being built, and the fact that kids coming right out of college are getting into startups and starting startups is absolutely wild. It's amazing. But what do you look for in a startup? What's the DNA that a startup needs to have in order to be successful? Now, successful, obviously, every startup has their own journey, but in the sense to thrive, what is the DNA of it?
So, I mean, look, at every stage in the startup, the definition changes. In the stage that we tend to participate in, we like to say in the business, it's founder, a good idea, and a great market, right? Right. The founder is 2/3 of the equation. So I look for what I call founder market fit, right? I'm less focused on the idea, because I know at the early stage, the idea or the product is going to change as they get more information. They should have a clear idea of who the customer is, and from a market perspective, I'm of the opinion it's always great to kind of conquer a smaller market that's adjacent to a bigger market. And so I look for those things. But as 66% of this is the founder. Right. And it's a combination of a real connection to a problem. As I say, an empathy for whoever has the problem. I think that's critical. I think it's someone who has persevered or struggled and overcome something massive. It could be that they are an athlete. It could be that they are, they've triumphed over an illness. It could be so many things that they've kind of struggled through. But I think having so much of, I say this a lot, so I think this is quoted in quite a few places, but being a successful founder is really a matter of staying in the game long enough to succeed. Right. And so a lot of it comes down to, why are they doing what they're doing, and is it going to be something that they're motivated to keep solving, when the shit hits the fan, which it will many times. And like, are they capable of being resilient, and can they kind of continue to re-energize themselves, right? And part of that is the team, right? And so sometimes you have solo founders, and it's tougher for solo founders. When I was in India building my company, I had a co-founder that was in Ottawa who couldn't travel to India, and he's our CTO, and he was really critical to the business. And it was really tough because being here in India running the company, it did feel at times like I was a solo founder. And you go to some pretty dark places as a founder. So having a great team, that you can kind of do this with and be in the journey with, and kind of pick each other up when you're down. I think that just helps keep you in the game long enough to succeed. So I think having all those things in place, just those are the ingredients that I'm looking for in a company at the stage that we typically get involved.
Right. Wow. I love, so the resilience, having that grit, overcoming challenges. Yeah, it's amazing. And having that team. I love how you mentioned the fact, being a personal athlete, if founders are an athlete, or overcoming a mental illness, or overcoming something, showing that they've been through something, able to overcome the challenges that will definitely arise and come about. Which brings to the next thing, just happened, like founder burnout. Taking care of yourself, mental health, making sure that a founder, because like you said, it's a very lonely place. And to have that support and know that you have the support, can help you overcome those challenges, can help you, prevent burnout or God. So what should a founder know before launching his startup?
They should know it's going to be tough. They should know it's going to, likely be a 10-year journey.
Mm-hmm.
They should be committed to that. They should have enough runway, to be able to get to product market fit, right, before they are looking for outside capital. I think they should really, it's about team, right? So who are you going to do this with? And I think, as I said, it's like, why are you the person to do this, mm-hmm, right? Why does this, the thing that you're going to do better than anyone else in the world,
right?
I think you have to be able to kind of convince yourself. And, if you can't convince yourself of this, then you're definitely not going to convince others of this. Yeah. But yeah, I think you really have to be able to play to your strengths. And that's also recognizing, you may not have everything you need to be the best company in the world. And thus you will find co-founders. And hopefully, you're lucky enough to have known them for a while and have, some synergies with them and really kind of know that when the going gets tough, you'll be able to keep going with them. Right. But yeah, I think those are all things, to really think about. I think, really, really identify the problem. I think so many founders that I talk with are really kind of ensconced with solutions that they think might be kind of useful, but they're afraid to socialize them, and they end up kind of developing for themselves and figure out, after a lot of time and effort, that they're not really solving a problem that matters to anyone, right? So the sooner you can identify the problem and start to communicate, your idea, your solution, or your MVP or whatever, and get feedback that this is something that solves the problem in a really impactful way that people would be willing to pay for, I think then you're ready to go out and start building a company.
Wow. They're just so lucky to have you there. I just want to apply, get accepted, force my way in just to pick your brain all day,
Well, our founders do that.
Well, I hope they definitely take advantage. So,
in order to work, I love founders. I have I just find an endless amount of energy to spend just with them. I mean, anyone who's motivated to go out and do the difficult thing, which is building a company and solving problems. You know, I'm happy to spend my time with those people.
Amazing. So when you look back at, you know, your career, for example, you know, what are the certain milestones that you went through that you said that uplifted or took you to the next step?
You know, I mean, so if we're going throughout my whole career, you know, definitely getting my first job in, you know, in an internet company. You know, that my sister was the one who was there when I got my job at the ISP, right? I told her I was on cloud 9. So she always bugs me. She's like, "Are you on cloud 9?" That was, you know, literally like a great moment. Getting into DoubleClick, you know, I had the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing people at that company and experience, you know, what a great culture is in a company. And so that was a milestone for me. And, you know, ultimately my boss at DoubleClick, who became the first MD for Google internationally, you know, she's still a mentor for me. And so that was a great, you know, great thing. I think, you know, having the courage to build the company, you know, and leave something behind, and really, you know, do something for the right reasons. You know, that's a highlight for me. I think being able to get to the finish line, you know, it was a real struggle getting to an exit, and it doesn't just happen. You know, there's a lot that goes into that, and you know, I lost a lot of people along the way, and you know, that was a massive milestone. And before that, getting my first round raised was a massive highlight. You know, then you know, I guess following that. Recognizing, so when you build a company and you sell a company, you know, it's really hard to go and have a job after that. But I can tell you, getting this gig at TechStars is like a massive milestone for me, because I get to do what I love, and it doesn't feel like work. Like, you know, it really does not. You know, it feels like I can't believe some days that I get that this is a job. And my wife tells me that it is a job, but you know, it's just amazing to get to spend time with entrepreneurs all day. So, you know, I think there's been so many different milestones that are part of this. Launching our program, you know, with our first 10 companies that we went out and recruited in India, you know, many of which were even Indian companies. You know, that was a massive, like, it just kind of brought it all full circle for me. So yeah, I mean, lots of great milestones, and, you know, looking forward to seeing our companies, you know, get to demo day, and looking forward to meeting so many other great companies. And I'm looking forward to, you know, just being able to say that I was part of the evolution of the Indian startup ecosystem. You know, I think that's like, I don't know in what way, shape, or form that will kind of manifest, where I'll be able to kind of look at that as a defining moment of the Indian ecosystem. But that's something I would really kind of look to as a future milestone that I would like to say I was part of.
Right. You know, as we know, it's definitely on the verge of bursting out. You know, we're just seeing the beginning of it. And it's definitely going to go crazy soon. And, you know, I think your wife just wants to make sure that you don't get too comfortable, and don't forget you have a home and 2 kids. You know,
she doesn't let me forget. Neither do they.
Okay, good. So, you know, there's so many more lessons that we can learn from you, and so many more questions I have. You know, but I know we're pressed for a little bit of time. What are some, like, you know, if you were to take, for example, you know, 2 important lessons that someone imparted on you, you know, any stage throughout your life so far, what would it be?
So one, you know, I mentioned my boss at DoubleClick, who, you know, was a mentor. She always says to me, you know, don't do things the hard way. And I think sometimes I really need to remind myself of that. Um, you know, be clear on what you want to do, but just yeah, don't do it the hard way. So I think that's been a profound change for a big kind of added a lot of perspective to me. And yeah, I think the big life lesson for me is don't be afraid to do things for the story. I find that if you can orient yourself around a particular challenging situation and recognize that at the end of it, you're going to have an amazing story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can start to look at things that way, there's no real downside, right? And B, you realize that it just makes you a much richer person. Like I really believe that there's a lot to say about richness coming from one's life experiences and one's stories. And ultimately, those come from putting ourselves in uncomfortable circumstances. With discomfort comes growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yeah, I think, I often remind myself that, sometimes you take risks and you put yourself in uncomfortable situations, and you do them for a reason. You want to grow out of them, but what's the worst that comes out of it is you have a great story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's getting uncomfortable with getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's
a big part. I think that's a big part of being an entrepreneur, right? Is recognizing that, you're going to create a lot of discomfort for yourself,
mm-hmm.
and being okay with that.
Right.
As I said to my earlier, wisdom, don't be, keep things, do the easy thing instead of if you can. So these might seem like conflicting, pieces of advice, but make the decision to be an entrepreneur. Recognize that it's going to be a struggle, but don't make it harder than it needs to be.
Right. Just as a human nature, just to complicate things for the sake of complicating them. And it's incredible. That's where the real growth happens. That's where we grow. When we step out of our own shoes, we step out of our own place of content and our own comfort zone. That's where we sprout and we grow into blossom into beautiful, beautiful, whatever it may be we're working on. That's incredible.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that for me personally, I think, look, I think, we're all growing, we're all aging, but it wasn't until I really embraced, risk and failure and discomfort that I really started growing as a person.
Right.
I think every entrepreneur, I think they need to recognize what they're doing, and they need to accept that it's going to come. It's going to be a struggle.
Right. Wow. So, you just graduated college. You have the whole world open to you. You can work for Microsoft, start a company, even be a barista in Starbucks. What message do you tell your younger self?
Wow. Well, if I was to go way back to my younger self, it would be before I graduated college. I'd make the decision to be a computer scientist, or an architect, or some type of builder of some kind, because I should have definitely done that. Then assuming I did either of those things, just go build shit. Go go create. Go just don't be afraid of taking risks. And as a younger person graduating, you have your superpower is you can take more risks than anyone else at any other age.
Mm-hmm.
You probably aren't married, you probably don't have kids. You can literally just get into anything you're interested in and learn from people and take risk, right? And so your opportunity to put yourself in uncomfortable circumstances will never be greater. than that moment.
Right.
So embrace that, make yourself just, cease that discomfort and follow your passions and learn, and then apply that.
Wow. Ray, there's no way I can thank you. I have learned a tremendous amount today, and not just a tremendous amount about in general, but first of all, I've learned a tremendous amount about yourself and your journey. And I could take out so many lessons from your journey in the sense of overcoming adversity, the obstacles, facing the challenges head on, stepping out of my own shoes and stepping into someone else's and understand something, be more open-minded, have empathy for my customer. But not only that, for myself, embrace the risk, embrace change, embrace the challenge, don't do it the hard way. Not everything has to be done the hard. Don't make it overcomplicated. And plenty of people are going to learn a tremendous amount from this too. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Ephraim.
It's been amazing. Yeah.